Welcome back to class. Today we start the period of Reconstruction. The United States was rebuilding a union, taking two countries and again making them one. It was rebuilding a national identity, no more Unionists and Confederates, but Americans. But mostly we destroyed a lot of things that literally needed to be rebuilt. A lot of infrastructure got blown up during the war. And even though we think of Reconstruction as being the aftermath of the war, many of the important parts of Reconstruction started before the end of the war. It started as we retook states. President Lincoln approached Reconstruction with a rather moderate temperament, neither as radical as the radical Republicans you'll be hearing about, nor as vengeful as many as they would have wanted as members of his own party. Nor as forgiving or as lenient as some Southerners hoped. Lincoln's plan for Reconstruction was first based on the idea that the secession of the South had not been legal, that they didn't have the right to leave in the first place, meaning that those in positions of leadership in the Confederacy, high political office, or ranking military officers, had committed treason, and they would have to be stripped of their rights as a consequence of that. Any plan to bring the rebelling states back into the Union did not include these men. He began planning reunification of the nation before the war was over, and really with the retaking of certain states like Tennessee. Lincoln developed what he called the 10% plan in 1863. 10% of the voting populace from the 1860 election of any rebel state would have to take an oath of allegiance to the United States and to the abolition of slavery in exchange for a pardon. You'll remember that treason is a crime, and as president, he has the authority to pardon criminals. This 10% plan was targeted at the landed gentry and economically powerful of the South. If the wealthy and powerful people in the region were loyal to the United States and supported abolition, they could sway any state. Once 10% of the population had taken the oath, the state would be allowed to form a new state government, write a new state constitution, and send representation to Washington, D.C. There were exclusions to this offer. Confederate officers and government officials of considerable rank could not take this oath. If the secession of the South had not been legal and the acts of the Confederation had been treason, then the men who led the Confederate government were, by definition, traitors. And those who carried out the war, the military officers, none of these men could really be forgiven because they were the prime architects of the treason that split a nation and led to the deaths of hundreds of thousands. Specifically, the military officers were not going to be forgiven. Many of the high-ranking officers in the Confederate Army had left their positions in the Federal Army in order to side with the states that they were from. It was believed if they were willing to break the oaths that they'd taken as military officers, then this oath would really have no additional value. At the time, it was announced that part of the reason behind the bill was to sap the Confederacy of their strength. Like I said, this was in 1863. Members of the Republican Party were not so agreeable as to let the South aristocrats back in with little to no resistance. Senator Benjamin Wade, a Republican from Ohio, and Representative Henry Winter Davis, a Republican from Maryland, proposed a different bill, a different way to bring people back in. It was known as the Wade-Davis bill. It was far more strict than Lincoln's plan. It required that the majority of voters took the ironclad oath, which reads as follows. I, state your name, do solemnly swear or affirm that I have never voluntarily borne arms against the United States since I have been a citizen thereof, that I have voluntarily given no aid, countenance, counsel, or encouragement to persons engaged in armed hostility thereto, that I have neither sought, nor accepted, nor attempted to exercise the function of any office whatever, under any authority or pretended authority, in hostility to the United States, that I have not yielded a voluntary support to any pretended government, authority, power, or constitution within the United States, hostile or inimical thereto. I do further swear or affirm that, to the best of my knowledge and ability, I will support and defend the Constitution of the United States against all enemies, foreign and domestic, that I will bear true faith and allegiance to the same, and that I take this obligation freely, without any mental reservation or purpose of evasion, and that I will well and faithfully discharge the duties of the office on which I am about to enter, so help me God. Keep in mind, you're not supposed to lie when you take an oath like this. Under the Wade-Davis bill, any Southerner would have had to take this oath in order to vote or to run for political office. Under the Wade-Davis bill, it would almost guarantee that any voters or office holders in the South, people who had been loyal to the Union, that had never given material support to the Confederacy. Now, the Wade-Davis bill easily passed both houses. Lincoln chose not to sign this. He thought it was too harsh. Instead, decided to do a pocket veto. Quick review on what a pocket veto is. After a bill has passed both houses of Congress, the Senate and the House of Representatives, it is sent to the President to either sign or veto. Those are his two options. The President has 10 days, not counting Sundays, to either sign the bill or veto it and return it to Congress. If he does not sign it within those 10 days and return it to Congress, it becomes law even without his signature. However, if there is a reason he cannot return it to Congress within those 10 days, then it's not his fault. It doesn't become law, but he technically didn't have to veto it. This can only be used a few times a year, usually within 10 days leading up to congressional breaks. If the Congress is at recess and is not there to receive a response, it's not the President's fault that he couldn't return it. The phrase pocket veto comes from kind of using that. He's not going to sign it or veto it. He's just going to shove it in a desk drawer or put it in a pocket and walk around with it until the time expires. As a result of the elections, especially in 1864, Republicans and Lincoln were powerful. Lincoln had run on a mixed ticket with a Southern Democrat named Andrew Johnson. Running a mixed ticket was meant to show that there was unity, that he wasn't trying to blame the war on the Democratic Party, even though the Democrats were the prominent party of the Confederacy, or even that he was trying to blame Southerners because Johnson was a Southerner. He was trying to create an image of unity. That being said, the Republicans still ran on a strong abolitionist platform that included the following on the topic of slavery. That slavery was the cause and now constitutes the strength of this rebellion, and as it must be always and everywhere hostile to the principles of Republican government, justice and the national safety demand its utter and complete extirpation from the soil of the Republic, and that while we uphold and maintain acts and proclamations by which the government, in its own defense, has aimed a death blow at this gigantic evil, we are in favor, furthermore, of such an amendment to the Constitution to be made in conformity with its provisions, as shall terminate and forever prohibit the existence of slavery within the limits of the jurisdiction of the United States. The Republicans felt that abolition was a good platform, as the war had turned in their favor, and as a good way to justify the cost of said war. It ticked many boxes for the electorate at the time. Most Northerners supported abolition, and had for many years. For others, abolition was a good way to punish the South for the war and make it harder for the South to build the wealth needed to rebel again. As an added bonus, it also likely emboldened the efforts of the general strikes taking place in southern plantations by slaves and sympathetic whites that were grinding to a halt the means of production in the South and weakening their war effort. As a result of dominating that election, Republicans proposed a constitutional amendment, the first of three that would really define the Civil War and Reconstruction. The 13th Amendment to the United States Constitution stated simply, neither slavery nor involuntary servitude, except as a punishment for crime whereof the party shall have been duly convicted, shall exist in the United States or any place subject to their jurisdiction. Section 2. Congress shall have power to enforce this article by appropriate legislation. 2 sentences. Just 47 words in total, and it changes the fates of millions of Americans, and also changed the way that the Civil War was discussed thereafter. Poetic reflections aside, this also changed the meaning of federal power in the United States. Previous laws regarding slavery that came from the federal government were only enforceable on issues or in cases that involved interstate trade or the crossing of state lines, like in Dred Scott. Section 2 just authorized the government to act within states on the topic or in cases that involved slavery, and created a sense of federal supremacy on this topic. The amendment came right at the end of the war. It was sent out to the states for ratification on January 31st of 1865, and the war ended on May 9th. It would wind up being ratified on December 6th after 3 southern states ratified the amendment as part of the program to re-enter the Union. But you know who wouldn't be there for those last 2 events? Abraham Lincoln. The war effectively ended on April 9th with Lee surrendering to Grant, but the Confederate government wasn't disbanded until May 5th. 5 days before, Jefferson Davis, the president of the Confederacy, was captured by Union troops while wearing his wife's clothes. Okay, I joke. Just a little bit though. It was reported while fleeing an early morning raid by the Union troops that would arrest him that while he was running away, he was wearing his wife's overcoat. This report would later be changed from reports of his wife saying that she had thrown a shawl over her shoulders to protect him from the morning chill, but the political cartoons by that point had already mocked him so heavily that facts really wouldn't matter. All joking aside, this is the part that you all probably remember either from other history classes or perhaps even cartoons, because it's been talked about a lot. I think the Animaniacs did a skit on it. On the night of April 14th, 1865, President Lincoln went to the Ford Theater to see a play, Our American Cousin, which is funny to me because he's from Illinois. All of his cousins were probably American. Famous actor and Confederate sympathizer John Wilkes Booth entered the president's private box at the theater and shot him in the head before fleeing the scene. It took Lincoln just over 9 hours to die from the head wound, dying the next morning at 7:22 a.m. Booth would be found and shot in a barn 11 days later, and the assassination turned out to be part of a larger plot to avenge the Confederacy and disrupt Union leadership by taking out key leaders. There were 3 targets. The first was President Lincoln, second target was Vice President Johnson, and the third target was Secretary of State William H. Seward. And sure enough, with 3 targets, they got 3 different results. Lincoln was successfully assassinated. Seward was wounded. He was stabbed in the face several times, but survived. And the assassin in charge of killing Johnson decided to quit before even trying. In hindsight, not killing Johnson may have been in the best interest for a Confederate sympathizer, but that'll be the next lecture. In all, 8 conspirators of John Wilkes Booth were arrested and tried. 4 of them were hanged for the crime, including the man who declined to kill Johnson. With Lincoln dead and the war just barely ended, fate would seem to smile on the southern states as one of their own would find himself sitting in the Oval Office. Andrew Johnson, Southern Democrat, would be sworn into office on April 15th, 1865, and would be the president charged with bringing the country back together after a costly war. But that'll be next class's lecture.